No editing.
Go.
Good morning, sir. What can I get started for you today? What's that? All right. 3 venti lattes. Would you care for a pastry? Nope. Mocha. 3 mocha lattes. Double chocolate chip muffin. Yep. You have 3 Paul McCartney CDs. Awesome. I love the Beatles. They are my life. So then. Assassination. Abraham Lincoln. Gun. Shoot. 3 shots. All right. So, 3 lattes, 3 mochas, double chocolate chip muffin, and 3 shots. No assassination. Oh, and 3 Paul McCartney CDs. It's gonna be 68-12.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we just saw the interaction between the cashier and the customer, and how this customer, I mean, he achieved his goal of how you use nonverbals to get what he was looking for. So this is so important, because sometimes it's not what you say, it's how you say it. We have Albert Murahavia. He conducted a communication research, and he found that 93% of our communication is based on nonverbals, and only 7% is based on verbal communication. So, but it's split between 38% vocal elements, just the tone of your voice, and the other 55, the other component of the nonverbals. Now I'm going to introduce Rob. He's going to talk more about basis of kinesis.
Thanks, Miguel. Hey guys, I'm Rob. This is my buddy Cody. Today we're going to talk about the basics of kinesics, and we're also going to start you off with a quote by Peter Drucker. He's a management consultant, also an author and an educator. And he believes that the most important thing in communication is hearing what isn't said. And according to Miguel, 93% of our communication is through nonverbal, so I would agree with that quote. Next slide, please. You just click the screen, that's fine. Now, body language is a type of nonverbal communication in which physical behavior as opposed to words are used to express or convey information. Next slide, please. Now, of course, like Miguel already covered, basis of kinesics is going to be facial expressions, posture, gestures, body movements, and eye movement. All that falls under the category of course, nonverbal. Next slide, please. Now, we're also going to touch on proxemics and haptics, although they do not fall under kinesics. We're going to talk about, because according to body language, they both fall under, like I said, both proxemics and haptics, the use of space and touch, fall under body language, and a lot of information can be driven from those two. Next slide, please. Now, before we get started about the basis of kinesics, we'd like to talk about the 5 characteristics of nonverbals according to MiraCosta, who is writing in her book, Building Relationships, Intercultural Communication. She believes that, number 1, nonverbal communication is continuous. It happens 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and if you can be seen, you are communicating. In nonverbal communication, there's never a time where you are not communicating, if you can be seen. Next slide, please. Excuse me. Now, also the second characteristic is nonverbal communication is unconscious and unintentional. She believes that we need to tune in to the unintentional and unconscious messages that we're sending to receivers, as well as we are receiving from senders. A lot of times when we're having conversations, we are not aware of the messages we are sending, and sometimes they're messages we do not want others to interpret or to view as well. Next slide. Now, she also believes that nonverbal communication is more believable than verbal communication, because there is a lot of contradictions between some of the stuff we say sometimes verbally and compared to things that we display physically through our body motion, body language, and kinesics. And a perfect example of this is, let's say I have 2 buddies, me and Cody out over here. We go to the movies and Cody says, hey Rob, let's invite Miguel. And I tell Cody, hey, yeah, we should totally invite Miguel. I love Miguel, he's an awesome guy. But my nonverbals do this. Yeah, of course, invite Miguel, he's an awesome guy, he's super cool. What does that say about how I feel about Miguel? You can derive your own information from that. Excuse me, TV is kind of big. Next slide, please. All right, guys. Now, she also believes that nonverbal communication is ambiguous. Even though it's more believable, it is also harder to interpret. Perfect example of this is simply a frown. A frown could be you're displeased or discontent, or simply you're concentrating extremely well. or even scratching the head. Scratching the head could be seen as you're concentrating, you're thinking, or simply you're relieving an itch. Next slide, please. She also believes that nonverbal communication is used to send relational messages. It's very rare that you would interrupt a conversation just to say something like, I find you uninteresting, and please don't talk to me anymore. Or I admire you, or I respect you. Examples of this could be, let's say you're at the gym working out, some guy wants to talk to you and you pull your headphones out. For some reason at that conversation, you're like, you know, I really don't want to talk to you anymore. Through your nonverbals, you simply just grab the headphones, start slowly putting it back into your ear, and then start going back to the bench and working out. And what does that say to the other person? Please don't talk to me. I'm here to do business, right? Agreed? Anybody? No, just me? Okay, nobody goes to the gym? Just me? All right, next slide, please. Now, we're also going to talk about the basic kinesics, which is going to be facial expressions. I have a cute little kid here. His name's Cody. He's actually when he was a child. Super adorable. We do not know what happened after that, guys. All right. So according to MiraCosta with facial expressions, next slide, she believes that there are six universal emotions that across all cultures can be displayed through facial expressions. All these six, no matter where you're from, will be displayed in a similar like fashion, no matter where you're from. A way to prove this is children born blind are actually going to display the same similar facial expressions of smiling and frowning or making a face where you're crying, and also obviously displaying sadness as the same as children who are actually born interacting and are able to interact with adults. Next slide, please. Now, she also believes, according to Amy Cuddy, who is a researcher in high power posture positions, she believes that posture has two main positions, high power and low power. You're going to notice that the first row on the very top is going to be high power positions. In these positions, you're displaying confidence. You're making yourself wider, taking up more space, more broader. And also, she has studied that in these powers of high power postures, your testosterone levels, male and female, are actually going to rise about at least 20%. Now, in the low power positions, you're going to notice that all the people on the bottom row, they're actually making them smaller, trying to take up less space. They're a little nervous. They're also showing less confidence. And anytime that you're touching yourself is also a low power posture position, because it's seen as you're protecting yourself, especially your neck. You're trying to cover your vitals up that aren't protected. It's just natural instincts for you. Now, we're going to go over some more basics of kinesics, and I'm actually going to let my buddy Cody take over for me. Thanks, Cody. Next slide, please.
All right. Thank you, Rob. So class, one of the first things I'm going to be talking to you about is hand gestures. So hand gestures can be any movement created with your hands. For example, pointing, symbols with your fingers. You can wave your hands. You can talk with your hands, sign language, and let's not forget the infamous dab. All right. So when you're talking about hand gestures, think about when someone is angry and what kind of gestures that they're going to use to express their emotions. So when someone's angry, they're not going to be very calm. They're going to be throwing their hands up like, what's wrong with you? Hand gestures are a very important part of kinesics because kinesics do not translate equally across cultural and geographical bounds, especially hand gestures. So for example, in the United States, the OK symbol simply means OK. However, in Afghanistan, the OK symbol means to literally shove it up your ass or to sit on it. In Japan and Korea, it can mean money. In France, it means it can translate to zero or worthlessness. And in Tunisia, the hand gesture OK literally translates to I will kill you. Other hand gestures, like the shaka, can also mean different things in different cultures. For example, in Hawaii, it means to basically hang loose. In Italy, it can mean that a man's wife has been unfaithful. And in Norway, it is salute to Satan. Next slide, please. So the next thing I'm going to be talking about is body movement here. Body movement is defined as the motion of all or part of the body, especially at a joint or joints. Body movement includes abduction, adduction, extension, flexion, rotation, and circumduction. So body language, like hand gestures, can also be interpreted differently across cultures. For example, in Tunisia, it is rude for a standing person to sway their body while having a conversation. Another example is how Europeans believe the Americans strut their stuff when they walk. As you can see, Conor McGregor over here. So he's swinging his arms wide, he's taking up a lot of space, and he just kind of has a cocky attitude, as opposed to this guy. You can clearly see he's not having a real great day, clearly. And then Bender over here just doing his thing. Germans are usually expected to sit and stand up straight as a sign of good character. Slouching or slumping is a sign of poor upbringing. Next slide, please. I'm also going to be talking to you about eye movement. So oculesics is the subcategory of kinesics, and it is the study of eye movement, eye behavior, gaze, and other eye-related movements. It is used in 4 different ways. So the 4 different ways here are, number 1, it conveys emotion. Number 2, it regulates the conversation flow. So body language, like hand gestures, can also be interpreted differently across cultures. Americans typically look at each other in the eye for a little over a second when conversating, and their gaze bounces around as they communicate. When Americans are done speaking or want verbal feedback, they look directly at the person they're communicating with to indicate it is their turn to speak. The 3rd one is going to be to monitor nonverbal feedback, and then the 4th one is to indicate interest and attentiveness. Some cultures are use much more eye contact than the American culture. For example, Middle Eastern cultures, they like to stare at each other to indicate sincerity and that they are telling the truth. According to Brian Hirayama, many Asian cultures consider direct eye contact to be very rude, especially when a younger person is speaking to an older person, a subordinate is speaking to a superior, or a woman is speaking to a man. Next slide, please. All right, so proxemics and haptics do not necessarily fall under the category of kinesics, but they are important in the use of body language in everyday life. This is due to the fact that